Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential because when you keep growing, we all get stronger. And we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT Podcast with Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the NASM-CPT Podcast. My name is Richey, and today we're going to talk about understanding reciprocal inhibition. I think this is important to get into because if you're studying for the test, you talk about reciprocal inhibition, and it only has something to do with flexibility. I feel like we only talk about it in terms of flexibility. There's autogenic inhibition and reciprocal inhibition. Autogenic inhibition takes place when you do static stretching. Reciprocal inhibition takes place when you do active stretching. You are activating the muscle on one side of a joint to inhibit the muscle on the other side of the joint. But I will admit that that is also a very limited way of looking at and understanding reciprocal inhibition. There is so much more. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. There's more. It's not just a flexibility thing. I like to think of it as it's also a means of better activating a muscle, getting preferential activation for something. I need to inhibit muscles sometimes in a reciprocal way in order to activate muscles. So it's not just a flexibility thing. Flexibility helps us understand it. There is a use for it within flexibility. But we're not limited to that. So let's talk about this a little bit you can look at it from multiple joints. If there's a multi-joint muscle, it makes a lot of sense because it works in a lot of different ways. But let's also look at it from here. Let's look at the muscle. There's an upper body muscle on the scapula that has become really common over the last few years that we've got to make sure that we activate this muscle. We have to make sure that this muscle is working. The serratus anterior. And I agree, a lot of times that muscle is underactive in a lot of people. And whenever we see scapular dyskinesis, a lot of times it's because of serratus anterior. So when we want to activate that muscle, we need to make sure that it is in the best position to do so. But there are other muscles, and let's talk about this too. This is like real life examples of what you read in the textbook and how it affects us in movement. So there's real examples of synergistic dominance. There's serratus anterior is a great protractor of the scapula, except that it oftentimes becomes underactive because other muscles are doing the job. There are muscles like, let's go with this one. Let's go with the pec minor. The pec minor can also protract. It's a pretty good protractor. It is by no means at all the size of the serratus anterior. So you would think that shouldn't be a big deal. These guys should work synergistically, being able to work together to protract the scapula. But nay, the pec minor likes to protract the scapula. Well, if that main job of the serratus anterior is to protract the scapula, and every time I protract the scapula, all I'm doing, if I'm trying to fix my problem, I'm trying to get my serratus anterior to work, then all that's happening is that the pec minor is doing more and more of the protraction, and the serratus is doing less and less. And so now I'm feeding the synergistic dominance of the muscle that I don't want to participate. I don't want that pec minor to be so involved in this exercise. So what do? Well, some of the ways that we address this, which I think is smart, we talk about inhibit and lengthen. So I might go in and I take a tool of some sort and I inhibit that muscle. I inhibit the muscle that becomes overactive, that synergistically dominant muscle. And I say, okay, let's relax the muscle there, my pec minor. Let's get it to calm down. Then let's go into a stretch. But in order to really understand what's going on, we have to understand more things about the scapula. Both of those muscles protract, but one of those muscles is an upward rotator of the scapula, and the other is a downward rotator of the scapula. So I think this is why this pec minor becomes so overactive, is that a lot of times when we protract, it's because our arms are down by our side. And if our arms are down, then it is in a more advantageous position in a lot of ways, just because it's a downward rotator of the scapula, so it's already in that position. So when we protract, it's there. Well, the serratus anterior is an upward rotator of the scapula. So when I upward rotate my scapula, when I put my arms over my head, it reciprocally inhibits the pec minor. Therefore, when I protract while my scapula is in upward rotation or my arms are over my head, my pec minor can't really do it very well. So now my serratus muscles get to work. They get to work because I'm actually making a practical application of reciprocal inhibition. I take my arms down and try to protract, don't get anything. Take my arms up and I protract, and all of a sudden I feel my serratus anterior working. That's because it's doing two of those joint actions. It's doing the upward rotation of the scapula and it's doing protraction. It is harder for the pec minor to do anything in that position because it likes to be in a downward rotation. It pulls into downward rotation. So when you're working with somebody and you want to strengthen their serratus anterior, and it's because they have an overactive pec minor, then I would say put your arms over your head and practice protracting. Practice protraction with your arms over your head. Another thing I'll point out too, like, yes, we don't really have good retraction either, but I think it's very good to practice protraction and retraction. And you can do that with your arms over your head. So that's a drill I might have my clients do, is just take the arms over their head, keep them up, and I just have them protract and retract, protract and retract. And so now they're working those protracting muscles, retracting muscles with the arms over the head, where so many of those muscles that get us stuck in downward rotation are now being able to participate. All right, that's just an example of serratus anterior. I got two more examples I think will really help and drive some things home. One is, let's say we're doing hamstring curls, and every time they do a hamstring curl, and this is almost everyone across the board, you see their feet turn out. Whether their feet are turning out at the knee, whether the feet are turning out because it's external rotation at the hip, or whether both of those things are happening, that is because the biceps femoris or biceps femoris does lateral rotation of the hip and lateral rotation of the knee. Wait a minute, Rick. That's too many joint actions. Doesn't it just flex the knee and extend the hip? It does do those things, but it doesn't just do those things. It can knee flex and knee external rotate. It can hip extend and hip external rotate. Well, if I'm looking at it and they're doing those curls and the feet keep turning out, what can I do that can take some work off of my biceps femoris and add some more strength, more preferential activation for my semisisters, semimembranosus and semitendinosus, the two medial hamstrings? Well, here's what you can do. You can put them right back on that curl machine and you can have them knock knee. So they're internally rotating at the hip. You can have them point their toes towards each other. So they're internally rotating at the knee, because the semimembranosus and semitendinosus, yes, they both curl the knee or flex the knee. They both extend the hip, but they internally rotate both the hip and the knee joint. So when we turn in, we can't lift as much. Why can't we lift as much? We're still doing knee flexion and still doing that hamstring exercise. The reason we can't is because the biceps femoris is reciprocally inhibited, so it can't work as well. But it also preferentially focuses on the semimembranosus and semitendinosus. So we might have to lighten the weight just to be able to do the curls that way. And I'll do this too, and I'll work these muscles, the same semimembranosus, semitendinosus, the medial hamstring muscles, because I don't have a leg curl machine at my gym. So I'll have people do bridges. So doing a floor bridge with maybe your feet on top of a bench. And if you just do bridges from there, that's wild hamstring exercise. But if you knock your knees together, keep your feet about hip width apart, turn your knees towards each other where they're almost touching, turn your feet towards each other, like your feet are making the diamonds in the sky position. Your heels are apart, your toes are touching, and then hip bridge that way. Those medial hamstrings are going to catch on fire. It burns. Why doesn't it burn the other muscle, the biceps femoris? Because you're not really addressing it. You're inhibiting that muscle. It's still participating, but not much. It's not helping out because it is reciprocally inhibited. You are going into joint actions, namely knee internal rotation, hip internal rotation, and that reciprocally inhibits it because it does, or the biceps femoris does, lateral rotation at the knee and lateral rotation at the hip. Now, all of those muscles, flex the knee, extend the hip, knee curls, hip extension, they all participate. But this, you can just move a little bit of movement and get the muscles that aren't working as well to work more and get the muscles that are working too much to not participate. That is how you practically apply reciprocal inhibition. How are we practically, or what are we practically applying it to? Generally, we're practically applying it to the synergistically dominant muscle. We're trying to inhibit that muscle, the synergist, or even a full-blown participator, like in a hamstring curl. The muscle that's the synergist that works together, that is now dominating the movement pattern. And this is an example that you'll see across the board when you see people doing hamstring curls, whether it's a seated hamstring curl or a prone hamstring curl, or even bridges. If you do box bridges, you're doing hamstring bridges, you'll see knees start to turn out, feet start to turn out. They are really focusing on the biceps femoris. Bring those knees back to a neutral position. It kind of gets all of them equally. Go into knee internal rotation, hip internal rotation, you're going to get the medial hamstrings. All right, let me give one more example because I think this is a good one. I get a lot of times where people get really overactive in their TFL. And the TFL is overactive, and we're trying to do glute medius exercises. So let's just say I'm doing a standing banded tube walk, a lateral banded walk. So you've got the band around your knees, the band's pulling your knees together, you're trying to abduct and then walk with your knees bowed out. And you're getting a lot of like TFL activity, a lot in the front pocket muscle, not necessarily on the side of the hips. Well, one of the things you can do is you can just, you could probably squat down deeper into it or lean forward more because the TFL is a hip flexor. So you would think that that would be a way for us to activate it more, but you can actually go into hip flexion because it's not actively doing that. You're going to see that the glute medius gets tensioned in that position. So it works. But here's another thing. The TFL is an internal rotator of the hip. Now, the glute medius, depending on where you're looking, it is perfect. The fibers perfectly abduct, or they abduct and externally rotate. So I might have somebody that I'm working with, and instead of going into external rotation to reciprocally inhibit, I might try to autogenically inhibit first, which means I might get some type of ball, some type of trigger point device, push it into the TFL, have them lie down on it, roll around, do some self-myofascial rolling, and try to inhibit, autogenically inhibit that muscle, and then do a stretch. And usually after that, if they get up and they do the tube walking, TFL doesn't like to work anymore because it's just been down-regulated. So the glute medius is like, me? Is it my time? Do I get to go now? But if not, and the TFL still jumping in there, some of the things that you can do are like you can pre-activate glute medius where the TFL isn't as participatory. So you can do your clamshell exercises, side-lying clamshell exercises. But one of the other things you can do initially is just turn your feet out. And I know I don't ever like to turn my feet out when I tube walk. I keep my feet straight ahead and my knees straight ahead. But if the TFL is nonstop trying to jump in there, and I've had several clients that this has happened with, where they're like, I just keep feeling it right here. And I say, all right, well, just turn your feet out and do the same thing. And they turn their feet out, and all of a sudden they feel their glute medius working more. Why? Because we reciprocally inhibited the TFL. So reciprocal inhibition is not just about if you can do a stretch in active stretching. It is a means of removing focus from a synergistically dominant muscle and preferentially activating the muscles that should be working that are being dominated. And this is how we make practical application of the theory, of the concepts, of the principles that you see in your textbook. So don't leave thinking that, and you've done the test, and all you think about is every time you do active stretch, it's when I flex my bicep, my tricep stretches. Yeah, okay, yes, of course. But there's more to it. When I flex my bicep and I'm supinated, my bicep works more. Because my bicep does elbow flexion, it does shoulder flexion, and it does forearm supination. But if I don't want to work my bicep as much, and maybe I want to work my brachialis or my brachioradialis, then I won't supinate. I go to a hammer curl or I go to a reverse grip curl. And that down regulates how much my biceps brachii will work, and it increases how much my brachioradialis and my brachialis are going to work. All we're doing is taking human movement science and applying it to get better, more quality movement, or to get more focus on a muscle I might want to work, which, for example, might be the bicep. I want to work my bicep. I keep getting my brachioradialis and brachialis are huge. I want my biceps to catch up. You might want to do more supinated bicep curls. All right. Thanks for listening. I hope that you found this helpful and you can start making practical applications. So for any of those muscles that you see that are generally underactive, whether it's your mid-traps, whether it's your rhomboids, whether it's your posterior and anterior tibialis, there are a lot of muscles that we like to get to. The deep cervical flexors, all these muscles, these weaker muscles that we see, not just to give those exercises, but to understand how you can activate them based on human movement science principles like synergistic dominance and reciprocal inhibition can help make you a better trainer and help give your clients better movement, quality of movement outcomes. Very cool. All right. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, share with your fitness friends and family. And if you want to reach out to me, hit me up. You can hit me up on Instagram at dr.rickrichey. Or you can email me, rick.richey@nasm.org. Y'all keep inspiring people to fitness. Thanks for listening. This has been the NASM-CPT Podcast.